Well, good morning, everyone. Great to be with you. And I've had a wonderful weekend to start. I got the trifecta. The Waratahs beat the Rebels last night at the SCG, and I happened to be there. The Swans, I'm watching on the big screen, came home as well. And the Sharks won. I've got my Shark socks on. Let's be very clear, this is not Bulldog, Eastern, whoever they are, this is Shark territory. Who? Oh, dear me. And this is meant to be harmony around here. I mean, my gosh. I'm just going with the truth. No, it's good to be with you, and also to see so many people that Beverly and I love for many, many years. Darren and Megan and Jim, of course, and Neil, mate, back from Hawaii, 7 weeks. We're going to find out more because we go to Hawaii. There's only one person or couple that has as much love as the Wikes of Hawaii, and that's us. And Neil and Judy, fantastic. I didn't know this was happening. I'm here today. Let me tell you, you've got gold. You've got gold. If I had a choice, it's this guy. So it's good to be here. Just let me mention a couple of things about Morley if I can. We would really continue to appreciate your prayers. Some of you be aware that there's a campus now in WA, in Perth. It was Vos Seminary, the Baptist Theological College in Perth. That's now merged with us, and there's one training arm, and that's Morley. And so we minister in both Sydney and New South Wales and in WA for the churches in WA. And in fact, I'm in WA next week. I can get back there again. WA next week as the principal of the Perth campus. And for our first graduation in WA, that will be on Thursday. And then the Morling graduation Sydney campus is on the Monday. We will be graduating again over 200 people. There's about that same number who are new students at Morling. So we continue to thank God for that. We thank God as well for our residential college. Morling Residential College works with Macquarie University and the locals in the community. It's right next to and on our campus, right next to our new buildings, but it's on campus. And as you can imagine, during COVID, it was anything but 35-40% full if we were lucky. We were in difficult situations, as all residential colleges were, right until the beginning of January, and now there's a waiting list. And so it all happened in a matter of weeks. And there are 27, I think, different nationalities, and it's just a buzz. So we thank God for that. Pastoral Supervision is a great new course that we have, equipping pastors to be able to do good, accountable supervision. And Neil is one of our first students in part, not that he needs it, but he needs a piece of paper to be able to do it. But hopefully, Neil, it's more than that. And our counselling and chaplaincy area is going ahead in extraordinary ways. What we need your assistance with is people training for ministry and full-time pastoral service. Across the Western world, those numbers are down. And sometimes they're down 30 or 40%. So whilst colleges have strong and ongoing ministries, if they're doing pathways in a number of Christian areas, the classical training and equipping for pastoral ministry is the area that all colleges have a great challenge. If they don't have resources, if they don't have other arms of Christian ministry, then some of them don't really have a future. So look around, see who you would see is suitable for training, and encourage them, whatever path God might take them to consider theological training. So if I could just share those thoughts with you, I continue to ask that you would pray and support Morling. We're going to talk about today about whose voice are we listening to? Whose voice are we listening to? As I was leaving the office on Friday, I ran into Daniel C., who had just been with a meeting with a Baptist Mission Australia. Daniel is a Hong Kong Chinese man. He's been training at Morling since 2020, and he gave me his card. He's now an official candidate, so he's handing out to everyone to get support. Daniel has 2 doctorates, 2 PhDs, one from Birmingham and one from Sydney University, and he has expertise in Indigenous medicines. His PhDs are mainly in the area of pathology and medicine. 2 PhDs, Indigenous medicine. He's now just about completed his studies at Morling, and he's a passion for holistic ministry, fitting for what we've been saying today, serving the spiritual, physical and educational needs of Hong Kong Chinese? No. Indigenous families and individuals in Sydney, New South Wales and Broken Hill. So Daniel, with his 2 PhDs, is now going into ministry amongst our Indigenous brothers and sisters in our state. That's amazing, isn't it? That's someone who's listening to the voice of God, and he's really excited about what this means and the prospects that means for sharing the gospel and being involved in holistic training and ministry. By the way, I'd say Daniel is 55 at least. And so there's no age barrier on training and equipping. In fact, if you know what takes place in much of Asia in theological training, people tend to retire in Korea and elsewhere at 55. What they then do is go to a seminary, do a 3-year degree, and then go to the mission field for 10 years. They could be generals out of the army, they could be whatever. They do that training, then they go off for 10 years. And by the way, under their mission engagement, they don't come home. There's no furlough. There's no coming back to visit. They stay there for 10 years. Then they come home. So, early retirement from the so-called secular workforce leads to full-time ministry in the mission field. They're listening, aren't they? Daniel's listening. Whose voice are we listening to? Well, another person who is clearly listening to the voice of God is John Saunders. As Darren would know, if you drive into the Morling campus today, you go down Saunders Close. We had to build that road for the development we've done at Macquarie, on the Macquarie campus, Macquarie Park campus. And to build that road was extremely expensive to do. And because we built it and it's a public road, the council decided in its love and wisdom of us to give us the naming rights for the road. And they said to me, give us a choice of 3 names, you give the 3 names, and then we'll choose which name we'll give to the close. So I said, that's easy. First name is Resurrection Close. Second name is Eternity Close. And third name is Saunders Close. They thanked me very much for that, and they said they'll get back to me in a couple of weeks, and they did, and guess which one they chose? Saunders Close. But we often don't know why Saunders Close, why that significance. This guy heard the voice of God. He was a lawyer, a minister in England, felt called to come out to Australia. You're talking in the 1830s, 1840s. He came on a ship as a chaplain. He arrived. He was our second Baptist minister in this colony, and he was the first one to really start a Baptist church, and he did so in a court. Empty court, that's where the services started. Went on to be Bathurst Street. But this man who came very early on in the piece saw that there was not harmony in the colony. So after the Myall massacre were a number of Indigenous Australians who Daniel C. is going to serve after the Myall massacre by white men on Indigenous Australians. This guy stood up in the pulpit in Bathurst Street and gave a sermon to the congregation which was published about the lack of human dignity and human worth for Indigenous Australians in the colony. He called the colony to account and said what God would do to the colony if it continued to go down the way it did, and called for the prosecution of those white people responsible for the Myall massacre. This is 150, 160, 170 years ago. In fact, if that sermon was preached in some Baptist churches today, the minister might be lucky to get out alive. He also very clearly stood against the rum trade that was taking place. And though he became the head of the Temperance League, that wasn't because he had a total opposition to alcohol, but the rum trade was destroying the colony. And then in a society which many of us don't know, where many of the leaders had no belief in a God who worked amongst us in our everyday life and thought of God as just being up there transcendent. It's called deism, but not involved in our everyday life. He spoke strongly with respect to the providence of God. For ill health, he went back 15 years later to London, continued to practice law, minister, pastor of a church, died in basic poverty because he gave pretty well everything away. His wife wrote a letter to the then paper. By the way, the media was attacking him all the time. Not others, but the media all the time, as you can imagine. Wrote a letter to the papers about his death. It took 6 months for the letter to get here. But the shift had so changed in the community, the letter was published on the front page. And a fund was instigated to support the widow and his family of £600 of public donation. He heard the voice of God. He comes to a colony. He's a new person in the colony. Whose voice are we listening to? And I sometimes wonder if there's a more important question for an Australian church today than this one. Whose voice are we listening to? We don't need more graduates. We don't need our churches sending us people who think that ministry is about a professional training and what their rights are and what a wonderful opportunity this is to have a profession that allows them to serve somehow God for the next 50 or 60 years. They're listening to their own voice. We need people who are listening to the voice of Christ, listening to the voice of God, and they're prepared to go to a colony and stand up for the Indigenous rights, as well as sharing the message of transformation that can only come in Christ. This country does not need people who are soft anymore with respect to how they live their Christian life. We need people who listen to the voice of Christ, and to do so is costly. It's radical. Why should we listen to Jesus? Well, verse 1 of Hebrews chapter 3 reminds us that we're in this together. Isn't that lovely? I often say, God didn't look down this morning saying, oh, Neil Dawson's coming to Maroubra. That's a good one. In his grip, Neil. You'll get to hear in his grip if you know Neil. He didn't say, I wonder who's here today. I wonder who's part of Maroubra Baptist Church's ministry. We have been called together. He talks about our common calling. Why do we listen to his voice? Because together, that's what we have been called to do. We are not here for any other reason but to grow together, to be his salt, to be his light, to be his representative, and to minister the gospel into our society, community, and the world. Why? Because no one is here by chance today. No one. We're all part of the puzzle. Why should we listen to his voice? Why should we focus on him and proclaim Jesus? And focus is really strong here, focus on Jesus. Another sporting analogy, I was one of the greatest sportsmen in Australia, no matter your love of sport, is Donald Bradman. And I thought I knew a bit about cricket, but when Donald Bradman passed away a few years ago, cricket experts were saying why he was so extraordinary, why he was 100% better than any other cricketer that actually ever played the game, basically. And they said that he, amongst all the people they'd seen, had the incredible ability to focus. The moment the bowler came in and bowled, nothing got in his head. He just totally focused on the ball. He was the most focused and intense person they'd met on the field. That's what the writer of Hebrews means here. We are so focused, nothing gets in the way of the vision and the calling. Nothing. We are focused. Why are we focused? We're his holy people. Holy simply means we're set apart. God has no plan B. Plan A is us. And we are his holy people. Holy means, apart from being set apart, we live his values, social values, moral values. We are his holy people. Why? Because he is our apostle. Now, that's an unusual thing to say of Jesus, that he is the apostle of God. But why the writer of Hebrews means by this, that he is the one who reveals the way of the Father. He shows us who the Father truly is and what the values of the Godhead are. He's also our high priest. Why do we focus on Jesus? We're called. We're set apart as his holy people. He's the one who reveals who God is. He is our high priest. He is the one who died upon the cross for us and rose again to make sure and guarantee that we are right with God. And many of you would know that the Reformation was born with Martin Luther. And Martin Luther's reading Romans 1:17. And Martin Luther couldn't find any peace with God. He couldn't find any relationship with God. Because in his world, rightness with God represented the works that you had merit before God because of all the good works you did. And no matter how much confession he did and no matter how many good works he did, he still felt separated from God. He's asking himself, how can anyone stand before a wrathful God of Romans 1:17? How could that be? I'm destitute. And then all of a sudden, this tower experience, the light broke in, and he read Romans 1:17, and he read that the righteous live by faith. They are made right with God by faith. And the world was never the same again. I'm not right with God because of who I am. I'm right with God because of who Jesus is. He is my high priest. And as Luther said, when I stand before God and he says, why should I let you in? It will be not a look at all these deeds, look at all the things I've done, look at my ministry at Maroubra Baptist Church. It will be, look at him. Look at Jesus. He's my high priest. This is transformative. No other faith or religion has this truth. Not one. There's all an element of, I've got to be something. I've got to be the best person I can possibly be. I've got to do more penance. I've got to do more self-help. No. By the way, that doesn't mean we don't do great things with the power of God once we realise his grace. but it's grace. It's grace alone. That's why Saunders came to this country. That's why Daniel's going out and serve the Indigenous people. Friends, there is no other understanding of the world that offers this and actually delivers it, as soon as his death and resurrection. And why do we focus on Jesus? Not only is he our high priest, he is greater than Moses. Think about this. You're a Jewish person reading this. Okay. Moses is a servant of the house. Moses has a room in the house, the family of God. But Jesus is the Lord of the house. Jesus with the Father made the house. He is the Son over the house. So he's faithful Moses, as great as they can get in Judaism, with his studio apartment in the house, which Jesus made and sits on top and created. Who is this person? Oh, he must be God in the flesh. We've got to be cautious. I was reading the other day, and it staggered me, but it's true. There are 4 strong Baptist theological colleges in Britain, and one of them for 16 years, think about this, for 16 years had a principal who publicly denied the deity of Christ. In assemblies, in papers. So harmony can get to a bottom end that anything goes as long as we don't disrupt harmony. 16 years, the Prince of Mauling equivalent appearing in the churches of England and doesn't believe in the deity of Christ. No. Don't bother about that, Jesus. Go somewhere else. Go to Maroubra. Just follow the sharks. Faith's irrelevant. You with me? So, together we must focus on the Lord Jesus Christ because of who he is to us as part of that heavenly calling. And why do we focus? Because if we don't focus on Jesus, our hearts will be hardened. If we don't listen to his voice, our hearts will be hardened. And the illustration is given of the children of Israel. There they are, they're called, they're taken out of bondage. They're released from slavery. They've seen miraculous things take place. They've crossed the Red Sea, miracle upon miracle upon miracle. They get out in the desert. Things get a bit tough. You can read it in Psalm 95, Exodus 17. Things get a bit tough. What do? Why did you do this to us? We would have been better off back in bondage. We've got no drink, we've got no food. They had already seen the miraculous hand of God in remarkable ways. And within a season, they're no longer hearing his voice. And that's what the writer of Hebrews is reminding us of here. We might be able to share the goodness and the greatness of God within our lives, as Jim has shared. But the danger is you stop listening. You harden. Other things come in your life. Friendships, priorities, all sorts of things change. And a hardened heart will not enter the rest of God. And for the people of Israel, that of course was the promised land, and they didn't. Let me tell you a couple of other Mauling graduates who haven't hardened their hearts and still listen to the voice of God. One of the people I really admire is Bruce Burgess. Some of you might have heard Peacewise. Peacewise was set up by Bruce. He's a lawyer. He did his master's with us. He did a thesis with me on Peacewise and how to share and create mediation centres. And this has gone around the country now. Mediation centres, training in schools, state and secular, it's just exploded. Where preventively they're trying to help people know what it is to be a person of peace. It's one of the great stories of Christian ministry in our community today. Bruce, after 16 years of founding this and serving as a CEO, has decided that it's time for him to hand it on, even though he'll remain connected to Peacewise. Who has Bruce handed it on to? Wayne Ford, another Morling graduate who's been with Pioneers and has been a pastor of our church. Or I look at Mark McCrindle and McCrindle and Associates that you see across the news all the time as a social reporter and the like, and the one who's placed Hugh Mackay, basically, a Morling graduate, and see the value and the good and the ministry that he's doing in our lives. Someone sent me a book that is, and Jim may well remember Gil Mcarthur. It's on the life of Gil Mcarthur, and it's written by a guy called David Price. Gil Mcarthur is a Morling graduate. He was part of the move into Irian Jaya way back in the 50s. He came out of Irian Jaya and went to Papua New Guinea, and he established the Christian Leaders Training College, which is still the major training college in Papua New Guinea. He came back and was a World Vision leader here. And David, who writes the book, became, for him, 16 years. He worked with Gil in Papua New Guinea, and David became the principal of Melbourne School of Theology, a Morling graduate. And who did Gil Mcarthur hand the Christian Leadership Training College onto in 16 years' time? An Indigenous Papua New Guinean, a Morling graduate. They're listening. By the way, if you hear Gil read the story, what happens after church? Well, when you arrived there, in the area they were in Papua New Guinea, and you decided to go and reach people in other tribes and communities, you had to have airstrips. So they would go through the whatever Papua New Guinea, find a place and a local tribe, build an airstrip themselves, often with the assistance of the local people, build these airstrips, and then after their meeting or whatever on Sunday, they themselves would fly themselves onto these airstrips they had built in Papua New Guinea, hold the meetings with people, and then realise there are other groups over the valley and the like, and then they would trench for 3 or 4 hours through the jungles or whatever Papua New Guinea, find another village, share the gospel with that village, and then build an airstrip, and then fly in. That's their Sunday. And I think Gil had 5 kids at home and a wife. Oh, I read that. We're soft. Really. If you hear his voice, it's a radical place to be. But if we do hear his voice, then we will not be hardened in heart, will we? We'll do what God has called us to do. But how do we do this? How do we keep listening? This is what I love about the Bible. It's so practical. How do we keep listening? I mean, how do we keep focused? Well, this passage ends up with a couple of hints, I think, good tips for what it is to keep listening to God, keep hearing his voice. One of them is to encourage one another. Now, when you look at that verse, the amazing thing about it is, what's it say? Encourage one another once a year? Encourage each other once a month? It says encourage each other daily. I've come to the conclusion that encouragement is about the absolute key thing to effective Christian ministry. I mean, with prayer, reading the Bible, but to be encouragers. One of the reasons I decided I have to go off social media because I found it full of shame. Cheap shots, belittling, malign. And encourage is where we need to be daily. And you know where those pockets are. I'm delighted to come to Maroubra because I know whatever I say, I mean, provided it's got biblical premise, I can get out here alive. You know what I mean? You want to be challenged. There are other places I go, I know I'm not going to be encouraged. When I leave, it's what comments are going to be made. Does that make sense? Last Friday, I was at Pacific Hills Christian School doing the devotions for all their staff. And I go there about once a term, and it's a great school, but one of the reasons I go there, it is a home of encouragement. It just oozes across the teachers, the principal, everyone. Martin Luther King, before he died, said, this is a guy who knew what it was to have to fight and have friends and whatever, but he said, what we remember in the end is not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Guys, friends often keep quiet. Don't. Encourage, encourage, encourage. Don't be known for your silence. Be known for your encouragement. If we are to be people who listen to the voice of God, as house parents, as someone in the workforce, someone who's retired, on the football field, socially, whatever, we need to be a movement that knows what it is to encourage each other in the journey God has called us to. And then the final thing that Paul tells us to do here, the writer of Hebrews tells us to do here, is make sure we have our confidence in him. And I'll pray that way as we conclude the service. Where is our confidence? Where is our confidence? To listen to someone's voice, we need to ensure our confidence is in that person. And if we listen to the voice of God, then we will share in his rest collectively. Collectively, we will be people who share in his rest. I've got to finish today with an analogy from sport. And this is the All Blacks taking on the Australian rugby team. Now, the All Blacks are the best rugby team in the last 20, 30 years. Yes? If you know nothing about sport, you kind of know. And this is their national religion. I was interviewing a former All Black. He played quite a number of tests for the All Blacks, and then he came over to Sydney to play rugby league. He lasted half a season and broke his leg and couldn't play anymore. And I was asking him, what makes the All Blacks so great? Why are you people who just basically always win? And he said, look, people use different language, but basically he said, from my junior representative days all the way up until I put on the All Blacks jumper, coaches put in our heads the 3 Ps. And when you do the 3 Ps, sometimes things go wrong, but basically if you get the 3 Ps right, you win the game. What are the 3 Ps? Position. You play the game in the other team's half, not your half. You play the game near their goal line, not your goal line. Secondly, possession. You have more of the ball than they have. And then thirdly, these two won't count unless you also have the passion. Maroubra, what a position. Just look out through the glass windows. I could be wrong, but my memory was part of the reason these windows were glass is so the community could look in and see what church and witness and oneness looked like. Could you be better positioned? Could we as Christians in our society today really, we've got a really strong position of resource and churches and people and ministry. And we possess the Word of God, the power of God, the resurrected Christ. We've got position. God has given us the almighty possession of his living Spirit. Christ is the Lord of Marupa Baptist Church. I just got to ask myself and ask you, do we have the third P? Without it, not much hope, not much happens, folks. Glass windows, worship services. On this Deputation Sunday, sharing with you, whose voice are we listening to? I'm just glad, and I'm not in any way saying this doesn't happen across the country in all sorts of different denominations and training institutions. I'm just glad there are so many people God has allowed us to share in their equipping and learn from them as well, who listen, who have listened to the voice of God, and their passion at times is frightening. You're from Hong Kong, you're Chinese, you're 55 going on 60, and you're going to minister amongst Indigenous Australians in Broken Hill? He is, and I bet you he's going to leave a great legacy. Let me pray for us.